another thing. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Reparations Study Commission. We're excited to introduce lots of things to be excited about. One of which is our presentation from the Smith-Volk superintendent. The other is introducing two more commissioners who joined us. And so before we get started, let us do roll call. So William Newman is not here. Felicia Lundquist. I don't see Felicia here yet. Garrick Perry.
Here.
Jeremy Baker Paquette. Jeremy online. Let's see him. Marissa Elkins. I see Marissa there. So, thumbs up. Marissa's here. Usman Power Green, here. Renika Montgomery Tomilko, here.
Here.
I see you on there, so you're here. Rachel Naismith.
Here.
Imakan Sudan.
Here.
Marsha Morris. I see Marsha's on there. Marsha? Thumbs up. I see you on the Zoom screen. Okay. Jasmine Goodspeed.
Here.
All right. I think that's everyone because I see Marsha there. Marsha's here, right, Marsha? Okay. Maybe the audio isn't going. All right. Let's get started with the approval of previous minutes. You have an opportunity to take a look at them. Do we have a questions or comments? The minutes? No? Move to approve?
Hello, is there an issue?
There you are, Marcia. I was just calling roll and I didn't hear you respond. But I saw you there. So you are here. Okay, so...
Hello?
Yeah, can you hear us? Could you hear us? Can you hear us, Marcia? Can you hear us? Here, I'll type it in the chat.
Is the sound on her computer down?
I don't know. Maybe. Y'all can hear me, right? Right, obviously. All right. Let's see. Chat. Share. Oh. Marcia, can you hear us yet? No? Still no?
I can hear you guys.
Okay, perfect. All right, there we go. All right. I just was doing roll call, but you just responded, so you're here. And great. And an approval of minutes. We still have a comment question.
I'll move to approve.
Move to approve. Someone second?
Second it.
Thank you. Okay, so let's go through the people here. Garrick Perry.
Yes.
Jeremy Pickpeck's not here. Marissa. Approve the minutes? I don't know if, oh, Marissa, can you hear us? Marsha, approval of the minutes?
Yes.
Usman Power agreed. Yes. Renika, approval of the minutes?
Yes.
Rachel Naismith. Rachel?
Yes. Yes.
Jasmine?
Yes.
Imakan?
Yes.
And Marissa unmuted and remuted. But there you are. Approval, yes. Marissa? I can't hear her, but maybe she could put it in the chat. Okay. All right. Let's go with public comments. We have some people here. Yeah. Please come forward, speak to them. Yeah, sure. Introduce yourself to everybody.
Hi, I'm John Berkowitz. Been outside for half an hour and it's cold out there, so I hope my mouth can do this. I was one of the members of the Northampton Reparations Committee back in 21 and 22 that got the ball rolling towards the City Council passing the resolution. And I've been coming to meetings, but I'm just really glad this commission is rolling along and the preliminary reports in and moving on. I just wanted to say two things. I had the really interesting experience this week of having lunch with two people, both of whom grew up in the South, and both of whom, these are two white people, both grew up in the South and both had ancestors who were enslavers. And they are strong supporters of reparations, and they're on their own individual path. And you will recall that there's been two films shown in this community in the last year, I would say, maybe even the last 10 months. The Cost of Inheritance, and that was put on by this commission, I think, or at least co-sponsored by it. The Cost of Inheritance, and the second one was more recently Acts of Reparation. And both of them really give some real concrete examples of white people joining with black people in a path of reparations. Really beautiful stories, and that became very real to me as I had this conversation with two people in our community. So I just wanted to share that. And then secondly, I did hear, I went on the website of Boston Reparations Commission, and there, as a major city, they're very actively on a reparations path, just like Northampton is, Amherst has been, still is. And there is a minister, I was told, giving, who's very active in the Boston reparations movement, giving, I think it's the sermon or the guest ministry this Sunday at St. John's Episcopal Church. So I plan to attend that. Should be fascinating. Obviously, anybody else can do that too. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And we'll get those details out to people about, maybe we can get all the emails and send it to people, post it. We'll do the confirmation of time from St. John's. So, all right, any other public comments? No? All right, let's move down our agenda to introducing our new commissioners who've joined us. Just give you all just an opportunity maybe to introduce yourself to everybody, say maybe, you're interested in being on the commission, and I guess anything else that you want to say. Just tap this here. This took me like 5 meetings before I figured out how to do it.
Oh, okay. Greetings. My name's Timmy Constantine, and I was a former member of the Sojourner Truth Memorial Statue Committee, and I helped establish the Scholarship Fund for Social Justice. That was a previous, I still am, currently I'm a member of the David Ruggles Center of Learning in Florence, and I hope to help establish something permanent in terms of reparations here in Northampton.
Fantastic. Yeah, great. Jasmine?
Akwe, my name is Jasmine Rochelle Goodspeed. I am Nipmuc, and I have lived in Northampton for about 12 years now. Grew up more towards Middle Massachusetts, and I'm one of the founding members of Ocotillo Cultural Center. I've been doing work on Indigenous reparations for almost my entire life, and I'm super excited to be here in my town working with you all.
Fantastic. I almost am tempted to have us all go around, actually, and just introduce ourselves to you all, too, because I think this makes sense. Yeah. So, Garrick, you want to go next?
There we go. Well, welcome, new commissioners. I've known both of you in some aspects over the years, and I'm really thankful for you guys joining us. I'm Garrick Perry, current city councilor at large. I was part of the group of councilors who helped write the resolution that brought us here for this, but I've spent most of my adult life here in Northampton, over 20 years. I have been a musician, entertainer, and a manager of many venues and places of culture throughout my time here, and I'm thankful to have a chance to do this work.
Great, thank you. Let's see, going down the list here, Jeremy's not here yet. Marissa, do you want just a quick introduction to our 2 new commissioners? I don't know if... Yeah, I think she's trying, but I don't know if the connection's working. She's unmuting, but we can't hear her. Okay. If that changes, we'll give you a chance by the end to go. Marcia, quick introduction.
I am Marcia Morris. I've been living in Northampton for about 4.5 years, and applied to be on the commission because I had an interest in reparations and have done a lot of personal study on Black history, and have a background in private industry and government. And so it's my privilege to study this with you all. And so I'm looking forward to meeting the new commissioners and getting to know you all.
All right. Thank you. And I am next. So I'm Usman Power Green. Been in Northampton about 25 years. I also volunteer at the David Ruggles Center and been working on a project with documenting Black lives in the Valley, which is more directly related to the work we're doing, particularly looking at slavery in the Valley and trying to understand that in conjunction with freedom. I also teach African American history at Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts. And what else? Yeah, looking forward to continuing the work, educating the community about the work, and getting y'all's assistance in the sort of as we get to the final stuff here, getting new ideas and also doing the community engagement stuff, which is obviously the key and what we're really focusing a lot of our energy on right now. So, yeah, great to meet you two. Renika.
Hi, my name is Renika Montgomery Tomaclo. I lived in Northampton for about 15 years now, and I'm originally from Nashville, Tennessee, and I got interested in the commission because I've always been interested in reparations and the stories of African Americans, especially like in New England, because growing up in the South, and in lots of places, you're told that slavery wasn't really a thing in the North, and it's more of a Southern peculiar institution. But as you dig more into the records, you see that it really, even after they abolished it, it still affected the way of life for people even to this day. So I'm really interested in not just reparations, but tying it to current issues that we're having in terms of education and housing and things like that. So I really look forward to working with you, and I'm going to be reaching out to Emercon to talk more about genealogy and things like that.
Great. Thank you, Renika. Rachel?
Yeah. Hello. I want to welcome the new members. And I'm Rachel Naismith. I am retired reference librarian, and I've lived in Northampton for about 30 years. Went to UMass as an undergrad. And I was attracted to the work of the commission because I feel like it was and is very important work for the community, for the state, for the nation. And so I'm very pleased to have been able to contribute to the effort and looking forward to doing so in the future. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Rachel. Sage?
Hello. Welcome. My name is Anthony Arena DeRosa. I also go by Sage. I work for this commission and have for a couple months now, and I'm here to be of service in any way possible. So please do call on me for any support or needs you may have.
Thank you. All right. There you go. There you have it, y'all. Y'all got notes on all that? Go around the room and see if everyone can remember everyone's names. All right. So we wanted to, again, welcome you two. And we're looking forward to working with you as you see fit. Let's move on to our guest speaker, who we're excited to sort of share his insights and perspective. I know that he's been talking to some of the commissioners about some of the work that's being done at Smith Voc, and so wanted to introduce Andrew Is it Link Hocker?
Lincoln Hoker.
Lincoln Hoker. Andrew Lincoln Hoker to address us welcome. Thank you for taking your time to give us your insights and impressions, related to racialized harms and any work you all have done. I was told about 15 minutes or so, and then we'll give us an opportunity to ask you questions, everybody. So as superintendent speaking, maybe we'll jot down notes, and if we have questions, we can ask them. So, yeah, stage is yours.
Good evening, commissioners. Thanks for having me here today. I won't be speaking that long, honestly. I have a few slides, a lot of data probably in the slides. I think just to probably just educate the commission and educate the community on, as a whole, who are we up at Smith Voc, and then sort of dive a little bit deeper into some of our students and some of the topics that, obviously what we want to discuss this evening. Just a little bit of background on who I am. Again, Andy Lincoln-Hooker. I've been at Smith. This is my 11th year now, 8th year as a superintendent. 3 years as the principal prior to that. Before I was lucky enough to be at Smith, I was a high school principal, assistant principal, and a school counselor at Munson High School. And then I started my career as a school counselor at Westfield High. So Western Mass guy, born and raised. I tell everybody who goes up to Smith Voc, I died and went to heaven at Smith Voc. We are quite a unique campus, a very unique community. And I'm proud to hopefully share some of that insight this evening with all of you. So, next slide, Anthony. A lot of people, I think, are perplexed when they realize how many students we have from outside of Northampton. And I thought it would be a great way to kick off with the commission. As you see the map of Massachusetts, that green is Northampton. We only have about 20% of our students reside in Northampton. The other 80% reside in all the other highlighted communities. So I'll tell a lot of stakeholders that we have individuals from the New York border, the Vermont border, the Connecticut border, and east of Worcester. And as you can see in the map, that's pretty accurate. So that in of itself, I think, allows some diversity to come on campus, whether it's racial diversity, socioeconomic diversity, and we'll talk more about that this evening. But it's great to see incoming freshmen come in. They have histories and stories, and they come in and they're meeting a lot of new students from all over Western and Central Massachusetts, which is a great opportunity for the educational experience up at Smith. So that's just sort of an illustration of who we are. Next slide. Probably difficult to see here, but I just want to show the commission. This is our enrollment trend starting back in 1978. But if you look to the right, more recently, since I've been here, you see that we've been increasing our enrollment. When I first came in 2014, we were about 440 students. This year, we're up to 600 students. But what I really want to point out is you see the difference there between the larger bar and then the shorter bar. The larger bar is the overall enrollment, which again is about 600 students this year. That smaller bar is the non-resident students. So again, about 80% of our students reside outside of Northampton. So again, it's an interesting dynamic. I think it's really beneficial for all of our students, but again, it gives the commission some context of who we have as far as students go. Okay. Again, a little difficult to see. I use this information when I talk to my board of trustees, which is in essence a school committee. It's a comparison, if you want to go back real briefly, Anthony. Oh. The numbers are going to be boring. I think if you can see the red, okay, that's all I want to really highlight, okay? But what you're looking at is the 4 Western Mass regional vocational schools. So Smith Vocational at the top, and then these are the sort of our alike schools in Western Mass. We have Franklin Tech. They're up in Franklin County. They serve the communities of Franklin County. We then have McCann Tech. They're up in North Adams. They sort of serve the upper Berkshire County area. And in Pathfinder, they're out of Palmer. They serve mostly eastern Hampden County, a little bit into Worcester County. And then you have us, obviously, at Smith Voc, as you saw on the map. We sort of cover everything. I like to look at this data, looking at when it comes to budget, looking at enrollment, looking at programming. Who are we as a student body, and how does that then sort of shed a light inside of our classrooms and inside of our shops? And I'm very, very, very pleased, and I highlight this to my staff every single year, how diverse we are compared to our counterparts at the other regional voc techs in Western Mass. As an example, anything that you see in red is sort of the most diverse in quotation marks, okay? So the first column is the amount of boys. We have the least amount of boys out of all the vocational schools in Western Mass. I think that's a great thing, okay? We have the highest percentage of girls. We have the highest percentage of non-binary students. So those are the first three columns. Then you skip the next, sort of that wide column, that's just our overall enrollment. The next column that is, again, red, that is the percentage of students that are African American. We have 1.5% of our student body, which again is a relatively small percentage. But when you compare ourselves to the other vocational schools, we have the highest percentage. That bottom one below the dark row there, I did add NHS just as a sort of a control group. Okay, so if you wanted to see how are we, with Northampton High, as an example, Northampton High has 3.7% African American students. We're at 1.5. And then you see Asian, we see Hispanic, we see Native American. Again, we have the highest percentage out of all the vocational schools in Western Mass. The white students, we have the lowest percentage of white students compared to Western Mass vocational schools. Then you see Native Hawaiian, you see multi-race, and then we get into our English learners. So a first language not English, 4.8% of our students fall within that category, by far the most diverse. As an example, there's only one other school that has any students that English is not the native language. That's 0.6% in Pathfinder. We're 4.8%. So again, we have a relatively large percentage of English learners. English learners, 2.4%. Students with a disability, this is something that we really take pride in. 35.3% of our students have an IEP or a 504 plan. The next highest is about 22%. So we're 13% higher just for the vocational schools. Statewide average, just as a reference point, is typically anywhere from 12 to 17%. If you're looking at schools across the Commonwealth, we're 35%. So again, that begins to write a narrative of who we are. The next slide is sort of some of our achievements. Okay, so you saw that previous slide. Who are we at Smith Voc? What type of student do we serve and educate? And then you look at our dropout rate. And this is what I really like to hammer home with our staff and our parents. If you looked at that first slide, you may draw some perceptions, you may draw some conclusions of who we are as a school, okay? How can we have 30-something%, almost 40% of students with a disability? You see the other various diversity demographics. Our dropout rate, 0.9%. That's the second lowest amongst the Western Mass vocational schools. You see Northampton High is 0.3%. So we're within the ballpark of Northampton High. You see graduation rate. Again, you look at the student that we serve, you probably draw some conclusions of what may happen with graduation rates. We have a 92.1% graduation rate. Very, very strong. Northampton High is 94.7%. And lastly, the attendance rate. Again, looking at the student that we serve, you may have some conclusions of students who may or may not want to attend high school and come to Smith. Our attendance rate is 94.6%. That's the second highest out of the Western Mass vocational schools. It's actually higher than the attendance rate of Northampton High. We're at 94.6. Northampton High is 92.9. So again, I think these are data points to celebrate. Tells a story of what we do up on the hill. Next slide. A lot of members in the community may want to know what our graduates do. I won't go line by line, but typically year in and year out, about 30% of our students will go off to some level of a post-secondary education, whether that's technical schools, 2-year colleges, 4-year colleges. You obviously see about 55% year in and year out will go off to work as a vocational school. We do have a higher percentage than typical that join the military, but that's, again, typically what our graduates do. 30% go off to some type of post-secondary, a lot go to work, and then we also have the military. Next slide. Now this is really the slide I want to hopefully not bore you, okay? But I think this data, if I can sort of break it down for the commission, I think begins to create some questions. And these are questions I have shared with my Board of Trustees. I would love to have the discussion within the city, okay? If I can give you the context of what I'm about to dive into. At Smith and any other vocational school in the Commonwealth, we have an admissions policy. So students have to apply to get into Smith Voc. And the federal regulations allow vocational schools to have up to 5 different criteria. And the criteria that we look at for admission into Smith Voc is grades. And typically, if we're looking at incoming freshmen, we look at their 7th and 8th grade academics. Okay, how do they do academically? We look at their attendance in 7th and 8th grade. We look at their discipline in 7th and 8th grade. And we look at a guidance recommendation or a teacher recommendation among somebody within in the middle school. They receive points for all those criteria, and then students either get accepted or not, or they get into a wait list. And as we try to fill, our admissions policy allows us to take in 150 students a year. We have about 300 applications a year. So we rank all 300 based on that criteria, and we begin to fill the slots, okay, working our way down the ranking system. So that's, in essence, in a nutshell, how we accept our students. And what you're seeing here now is when you look at only the Northampton students, again, 20% of our population, but we're really able to dive into our Northampton population and look at what happens here within Northampton, and what you're about to see, I think, will be startling, to be quite honest, okay? The top section is the students of color, so I think for this evening, we'll focus on the students of color, but you also see the same analysis when it looks at low income, when it looks at students with disabilities, and when it looks at English learners. And as we all know, there will be students of color who will also be low income, who may also be a student with a disability, so there's a lot of crossover. But for this evening, let's just focus on the students of color. If any commissioner has any other questions about the other demographics, by all means, we can dive into that. So students of color. When this freshman class was 8th grade, so last year, okay, when they were applying to come to Smith, that cohort, that catchment area of 8th graders in Northampton, 27% of those 8th graders were students of color. That means 73% were white students, okay? So that's sort of our catchment area, 27% students of color. Of the applications that we received, of that 27% of students of color, 35% of the students of color applied to come to Smith. 18% of the white student population in Northampton applied to come to Smith. Now you understand, the actual number, there are more white students applying, even though you see the percentage. But the point here I want to make, and I think there's perceptions around Smith Voc about potentially some racial tension and whatnot. My first question to anybody is, why is there a higher percentage of students of color who apply to come to Smith versus the white students who want to apply to come to Smith? That's question number one. Why is that happening? The next row is offers made. So again, 35% of students of color in 8th grade at JFK applied to come to Smith. 48% of those applicants got in. They received an offer. Doesn't necessarily mean that they chose to come here, okay? For the white students, again, only 18% of the white students applied, but of those that applied, 78% got in. This is question number 2. And you see that side note, DESE is the Department of Ed. They consider this an opportunity gap. So why is there only 48% of the applicants who are students of color getting accepted, while 78% of the white students are getting accepted? When we're looking at middle school, 7th and 8th grade, grades, discipline, attendance, and a recommendation. And if you take the liberty at some point when you can't sleep tonight, you can look at the other, okay? And you're going to see the same trend. You're going to see a higher percentage of low-income students applying versus the non-low income, but you're going to see a smaller percentage get in. Same thing with the students with disabilities, same thing with the EL students. So when I share this with the Board of Trustees, I think it's enlightening, okay? Because what I've heard in the community and what I hear when I talk to just stakeholders is that as a vocational school, students of color don't want to go there. That's simply not true. You can see that, okay? The higher percentage want to go. But the concern as an educator, the concern as an administrator, why is the percentage of acceptances that, vastly different? So what is happening? If I'm a student of color in Northampton, what is happening with my grades? What is happening with my discipline? What is happening with my attendance? And what is happening with my recommendation? And I would beg to argue this question starts before 7th grade. What happens in 1st grade and 2nd grade and 3rd grade and all the way up through? So if I'm a student of color, I'm not scoring as high academically. I may be missing more days of school. I may be more in trouble. And again, discipline, as a side note, we're not talking about office detention. We're not talking about throwing food in the cafeteria. DESE changed this regulation a few years ago. So as a vocational school using discipline, we can only use the major infractions, which is typically assaulting a staff person, getting into a major fight, bringing drugs to school, bringing weapons to school. Those are the only infractions that we can use to look at the discipline, which in fairness, most of our applicants receive full point. There's not too many of those major issues, but that is out there, okay? So in reality, we're really looking at academics, attendance, and that recommendation. And I want to focus on the recommendation real briefly because this past week, the Board of Ed, so the Board of Ed, if you're not familiar with them, they're sort of the overarching policy makers within the state. They oversee the Department of Ed. And they're actually analyzing admissions policies, and they're analyzing this data that I'm sharing with you this evening. They're analyzing it statewide. Because Northampton, we're not living in a vacuum. This issue that I'm addressing this evening is statewide, okay? This data is no different. And one thing that really startled me as a former school counselor, as you know, statewide, they looked at these criteria that I've referenced, and they wanted to see if any of these demographics, if they scored lower or higher with any of the criteria. And typically, any of these demographics scored lower in all of the criteria, including the recommendation. And that really upsets me. So as a former school counselor, if I was a middle school counselor working with my middle school students, and my middle school students were applying to go to a vocational school, why are my recommendations significantly lower for my students of color versus my white students? We're talking about highly educated adults who are scoring students of color at a remarkably lower rate than white students. I can't say that's the case here in Northampton. I'm just saying that's a statewide trend. And we are looking at recommendations at Smith, so I don't want to go on the record to say that's an issue, but statewide it is an issue. Any questions? I mean, I feel this is really the most important topic when we're looking at education K-12 here in Northampton.
Yeah, I had a question. The first question is that, given the statewide emphasis, has there been any studies published to answer this question? Because one would think that, with the 8,000 universities in the state of Massachusetts, that some, school of education would sit down and try to present a study that would analyze this data for us. I mean, obviously, this group of people don't have I don't even know if all of us know what DESE even is. You know what I mean? So
there hasn't been any official university level studies. There's been a lot of discussion at the state level. A few years ago, when I was early on in my superintendency, this concern that the selective criteria was biased sort of came to light, and the Department of Ed and the Board of Ed changed the regulations. So one example was that discipline. Okay, I just mentioned that we can only look at the major infractions. They made that decision because they didn't want us to look at the simple office detentions. The kid who throws the food in the cafeteria, we can't look at that anymore. Early on in my superintendency, we could look at those infractions. So that's sort of been not watered down, but trying to make it more of an equal playing field for all students. Another thing that they changed was the academics. So they're really pushing us to condense. So as an example, previous regulations, if a student received an A, they got more points if they got an A versus a B versus a C versus a D. Now, at Smith, we look at an A and a B as the same. So if you got a B in a class, it's the same weight as an A. And C's and D's are the same. So we're trying to make it more level playing field across the board. Attendance, we can only look at excused absences now. We can't look at tardies, we can't look at dismissals. And it's only excused absences. And the argument that was looking at bias and looking at some of our protected classes, the concern was if I am a student of color and I happen to live in a single-parent household in one of our developments, is my mom or my dad or my guardian, my grandparent, whoever I live with, do they have the means to get me to a doctor to get a doctor's note to excuse that absence? So what we're finding, I say we, it's the state, was finding that the unexcused absences were unfairly punishing students of color at a higher rate because they didn't have the means to get a doctor's note. So the state said you can no longer look at unexcused absences. It's only the excused absences. So they haven't done a huge formal study, but they have tried to make it more fair. But as you can see, this data is still showing that there's discrepancies.
Yeah, I guess just to follow that up real quick, and Rachel, I see your hand, and others, is just, so the report you're citing, is that somewhere that can be made available? Is it on a website? So we could look at the report that, because you guys are making policy based on a report, and so it'd be great to be able to see that sort of fleshed out.
I can definitely share. They haven't made any changes based on the data I'm just sharing with you right now.
Yeah.
They're verbally discussing it at the Board of Ed. I happen to take a screenshot of the most recent meeting and I put it into an Excel spreadsheet. I can share that with Anthony, who can.
Yeah. Just you know, again, it's
statewide data.
Yeah, it's just always useful to sort of be able to look at the professionals, analyze it. Do you know what I mean? And sort of see the bigger picture. All right, Rachel had her hand, and did somebody else in here have it? Rachel, you got the mic.
Yeah, hi. So this is very interesting, and I'm just wondering in terms of the people who make these admission decisions, I'm curious as to the amount of subjectivity that there might be in these decisions, because there's always some subjectivity as much as you want to stick to the numbers, right. And whether people have actually looked at the admissions staff in terms of rating whether they're being fair.
So, great question. One point is the admissions is a blind admissions. So all we're seeing is the numbers, and we're plugging the numbers into some type of an Excel spreadsheet, and it spits out the ranking. So we don't know who is applying, if they're a student of color or not, if they have a disability or not, if they're low income or not, which I think even makes it more telling, by removing that subjectivity out of it. I will say that many years ago when I first went to Smith, the interview was one of the criteria that we used at Smith. It is a criteria that many of my colleagues across the state uses. And they feel that the interview is the opportunity for a student, whether they're a student of color or not, to come in and really just talk about who they are and why they want to go to that vocational school. At Smith, we felt that that was an easy way for bias to sort of get introduced into the system, and we didn't want that. I didn't want to run any risk of any of my school counselors to sit with any student and be biased or not. So we said, let's just eliminate the interview. So that's why we don't do the interview. If a student doesn't get in and they want like an appeal process, then that's where the interview comes in, but it's not standard across the board.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Anthony, is it possible for you to take the graphic down so we can see everybody?
Other questions? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I do have a question. When I came to meet with you, we talked about what was going on specifically at your school in terms of Black student achievement.
Yep. One more slide I can show you. I think that's where you're alluding. You're a great transition.
Right. Thank you.
There we go. So I think, Commissioner, this might be the slide you were alluding to. And so I gave you the data. You sort of have a better understanding of who we are up at Smith and the students that we serve. And I think the admissions data, I think, is very, very telling within the city. I think that is a worthwhile conversation. Before I get into sort of these bullets, I do want to recommend, as a superintendent, looking at that data, I always say, what can we do at the elementary and middle school levels? I don't have that authority, but what can we do for tutoring services? What can we do for, is transportation an issue? What can we do for, within the school, for any mentoring programs? What I'm hearing at the state level, that counselor recommendation, It's all about relationships, is what the Department of Ed is saying. And if I'm a student of color or low income, do I have that positive, strong relationship with an adult in the school? And most likely I may not, which is why that counselor recommendations is coming in lower. So what can we do, again, K-12, but really K-8, to strengthen the engagement, strengthen the relationships, and then as far as the academic support, what can we do? Those would be my questions to ask the city. But what are we specifically doing at Smith? One thing I first noticed when I came to Smith back in 2014, again, I went from Munson High, which is a traditional high school, small, relatively rural community. And if you walked into lunch duty at Munson High, which is the same as most cafeterias across the Commonwealth, and you look at where the students sit, it's pretty typical of what you're going to find when you walk into a cafeteria at the high school level. There's going to be what they call cliques. So you may have the jocks and the non-jocks. You may have the music kids. It may be by grade. Now, when I was at Munson, it was mostly by grade. I knew on one side of the cafeteria, that's where the freshmen sat. And then you sort of, no pun intended, graduated across the cafeteria until I was a senior, and you sat on the other side of the cafeteria. That's typically how they broke themselves out. Again, no assigned seating. This is just teenagers and how they sort of, sit. I went to Smith, and that was not like that at all. How the seating in the cafeteria at Smith is typically by the vocational program. So you've got black students and white students sitting together. You've got Hispanic students sitting together. You've got low income and non-low income sitting together. You've got all different. If you look at a student, they're all different, but they're sitting together, and the common denominator is the vocational program, which I think is great. I find, and if you talk to any teacher, any administrator at the high school, the acts of violence, as far as fights, I've been there 11 years. I think I've seen 3 fights in the 11 years. Most high schools, you'll see 3 in a year. So that violence isn't there, I think, because the interpersonal relationships are stronger up at Smith because the students are there. Half their time is within the vocational program. So again, back to relationships. They're stronger, they're more positive when you have a tight-knit community, not broken down by race or ethnicity or anything else. It's simply by vocation. So that's just, I wanted to highlight that, when it came to the cafeteria seating. Family feedback. I've heard a lot of this when I was principal, then superintendent. Many families reach out to me to say, I'm not sure what you're doing, but my student finally loves school. They were bullied in middle school. They hated to go to middle school. They didn't like the academics. They didn't like to do the homework. But now they come home, and all they want to do around the dinner table is talking about what they learned in school today. Again, typically vocational focused. I don't think there's too many conversations around math and English. But I'll take a conversation around school any day, no matter what that topic happens to be. So again, another very strong benefit, I believe, with the students at Smith is that they are engaged, they are excited, they see the end result, and they want to talk about it with their families and with their friends. I think the hands-on learning, it provides a much more relevant and engaging experience. I think most of us probably in high school, when we're taking algebra, geometry, or history, we struggle with the why. Why am I learning this algebra? I'm never going to use it in the real world, or that English concept, and so on and so forth. At Smith, our schedule is a week on, week off. And that means if I'm a freshman, 1 week I'm in my academics, the following week I'm in my shop, and then we alternate back and forth. So when I'm in algebra class, or I'm in an English class or a science class learning those concepts, guess what? They're being applied the following week within the shop. So it's a direct engagement. They understand that the relevancy, okay, which I believe when it comes to academics, it raises the academic success. Again, I know most of us realize MCAS has been voted down, but I use the example. When I came to Smith, I could not understand. The students at Smith are in academics half the time. It's the same school year, 180 days. So how can a student who goes to Smith Vocational and they're in that math class or the English class half the time, because they're in the shop the other week, but they can pass the same MCAS as a student who goes to Northampton High? And that student at Northampton High has twice the amount of math instruction, twice the amount of English instruction, yet our students are passing MCAS at the same rate. How does that happen? When you look at, again, that graph I showed you earlier, 35% of our students have a disability. I think it speaks volumes of what's happening at the high school, okay? So that's the family feedback. The last bullet, that pandemic how the pandemic really impacted us. Our enrollment was going up. Our applicants went through the roof during the pandemic. We only shut down, totally shut down and went virtual the spring of 2020 when we all had a shutdown. The fall of 2020, our shops were in person. And that was, the big push was with our union, our teachers, our families, our students. We all wanted to be in person because how do you learn virtually if you're in cosmetology or culinary or whatever? So we found a way to get our students on campus, in person, learning. And the big thing was sort of this, the self-esteem aspect, I feel, was very strong. That I knew and families knew that the jobs during the pandemic that did not shut down, that did not work remotely, were the jobs that we're preparing our students for at Smith Folk. If I'm a plumber, I still had to go to work. If I was an electrician, I'm still going to work during the pandemic. So the families really bought into that, and the students really bought into that, that what I'm learning, that skill that I'm possessing and I'm learning about is truly essential, no pun intended. And I think students really bought into that and really saw the value of their work and what they're learning was important. Those are also jobs that can't be sourced out to other countries. Again, you can't call a plumber up in another country to come fix your toilet. You know, they're local, which is very, very important. Now, are we perfect? Far from it, okay? Do we have concerns and issues? Yes, we do. And I just want to talk briefly about how we sort of, we don't solve all the problems, okay, but how we try to address it up at Smith Folk when it comes to racial or cultural conflict. So what we found this year, we have some curriculum that we've actually embedded into the vocational programs. So as a vocational instructor, even I might be a cosmetology instructor, that plumbing instructor, the animal science instructor, so I'm teaching that skill, but we're also going to be talking about interpersonal conflict and how do we handle that. And what we're finding is the students are much more engaged and they're more apt to sort of absorb that lesson when it's sort of this vocational perspective. What we find is if we do a school-wide assembly and we talk about race and we talk about being anti-racist, it's not accepted at the same rate we want it to be accepted. Okay, but if we drill down and embed it into how I think and how I speak and how I interact with you, that's going to impact my job. Our students really pick up on that and they do a great job. Case in point, I was a principal at Smith one of my first couple of years, and we had a racial issue going on. And I'm calling the students down, and I had families coming in, and we're kind of working through it. And I couldn't understand why families, not only the student, but the family, they wanted to argue with me about thought process, okay? And I'm trying to explain how your thinking is racist. And we got into this debate of my way of thinking is different than your way of thinking, and we get into this tit for tat, and it wasn't working. So I stepped back for a second, and I thought, and I was talking to, there's a family that happened to be plumbers, and I said, what would happen if, as a plumber, if you had a Confederate flag as a front license plate, okay, and you show up to a job site, somebody's house to fix their toilet, and that homeowner sees you drive up the driveway with that Confederate flag license plate, what would happen? And they said, well, most likely I'd probably lose the job. Yes, you probably would lose that job. But then what happens in the real world? That homeowner then tells their friend, who tells their friend, who tells their friend, and tells their friend, and before you know it, you're not getting any jobs. Simply because you chose to stand by your freedom of speech, and you want to stand by that Confederate flag. I'm not going to change your way of thinking, but you need to understand that your way of thinking has natural consequences. And that's your choice. And in that lesson, as we begin to embed it in the vocational programs, all of our students are picking up on it. I feel they're picking up on it at a higher rate than simply doing a school-wide assembly saying the way you're thinking is right or wrong. They don't take that really well. One last point is ISS is our internal school suspension. We rarely use it, but it's a way to keep kids in school if they have some major infractions. We don't want the students sitting home doing nothing. We have an adult in that particular program. Oftentimes we tie it to academics. We assign some academic work, but we also have curriculum focused on whatever the infraction happened to be. If it was tobacco, we have tobacco curriculum. Oftentimes, if it's some type of interpersonal conflict, we have relationship type of curriculum that our students learn. So no matter where they're at, whether it's a consequence, infraction, discipline focused, we have curriculum around how can you better handle yourself so you don't get into that argument again. And then on the vocational side, instructionally tied to your future employment, how we interact and treat one another has a direct impact on your paycheck. And that's what our students are focused on, is that paycheck. That's why they're there. They really value their time. They will challenge you if they feel that you're wasting their time. And they're going to challenge you if they feel that what you're trying to teach them is not going to make them money down the road. So it may seem simple, but it works for the most part. So I open up to questions, comments.
Other comments, questions, online or in person? This has been I just want to say that this has been very comprehensive and we appreciate it. But Marcia, you're unmuted, so I'm going to assume you have a question or comment.
Yeah, can you speak directly to how the African American students are doing in terms of their academics? Do you have a sense of whether or not their achievement is at the same percentage as white students?
Yeah, I don't have quantitative data to share. I wish I did. I will say qualitatively, and I say that, as you can imagine, every year, right around this time of year, our seniors, no matter where you are, you know who's struggling, and we want to get them to the finish line. So I'm looking back at, in the past 10 years, those students that we have to pull aside to say, well, how can we get you over the finish line, whether it's academic classes or the shop. Quite honestly, I think that most of the students that we have that are struggling, that we have to pull aside and we get them, we bring them back during February break, we bring them back during April break to make sure they're catching up, are not the black students, they're the white students. I can't think of that many students of color who are in that boat as a senior who might not be graduating. There may be some, but honestly, not enough for me to say, wow, there's an issue there.
So when we spoke, you talked a bit about what you were seeing in terms of achievement gap. I think what you're saying, it gets caught at when the students apply to the school.
Yes.
And that's where the achievement gap is clear.
Yes.
And so for students that you do accept, are you saying that you only accept the students that are at that level of that achievement, that they don't have that achievement gap problem? Are you saying that you do work with African American students if there's an achievement gap problem?
Yep. Yeah, great question. The first way I'm going to answer that question would be, again, approximately 300 applications a year. We can take 150. But that does not mean that 150 students aren't getting in. Okay, that's the basic math. But as you can imagine, we offer acceptances to the top 150. Not all 150 are going to accept. They're going to decide to stay at in Northampton or whatever school they're at. They may choose a private school, charter school. We know there's plenty of choice. So as students are turning us down, we keep working down that list and working down that list and working down that list until we fill 150. Typically, we're getting down into the low to mid 200s. So at the end of the day, we're probably only truly denying 50 to 70 students. So my point is, you get down towards that bottom, we do have students who have academically struggled or had attendance issues or whatnot. So they're coming in with any kind of history from K-12 or K-8, but then how can they then, when they get to Smith, you saw the dropout rate and you saw the graduation rate, overall is very strong, and I don't see a lot of gaps between students of color and white students, honestly, at the high school. So my conclusion would be, no matter who you are, when you get to the vocational school, you achieve at a higher rate. And back to Chairperson, your question about the research.
Yep.
There was research done many years ago down in Yukon, so the Connecticut vocational system. That is publicly known. And the question is exactly, Commissioner Morris, what you're getting at right now, this achievement gap, okay? And what that study found in Connecticut, no matter where that cut score was, okay, so philosophically, 1 year you may have a stronger applicant pool. Okay, so that last person getting in may have been achieving at a higher rate. The following year we had a weaker applicant pool, so the last kid who got in was achieving at a lower rate. Okay, so you had these two different cohorts strong and a weaker. And what the study found is, no matter who you are, and no matter where you were coming in, when you graduated at a higher rate if you went to the vocational school, and your hourly wage upon graduation, you were higher, you made more money if you went to the vocational school versus the traditional school. So I think that conclusion, no matter who you are, as long as you make the choice and as long as you get in, no matter where you are success-wise in middle school, you are going to achieve at a higher rate within the vocational program. So then the question is why? And I think what the Department of Ed and Board of Ed is realizing is that hands-on learning is much more engaging. The students, they stay on task better, they can follow directions better, and they achieve at a higher rate. So I think it's the pedagogy of how we teach the material is extremely effective, no matter who you are.
Okay, I see that. Oh, you have another follow-up? Okay, good. No, it's okay.
Do you have any thoughts about K through 8 and why you think the achievement gap there's such a differential?
I have many guesses. And I think
well, we asked you for your expert opinion. That's why we invited you.
I do think engagement and relationships go a long way, especially at the younger grades. If I'm a child in elementary school and even middle school, if I am not engaged in school, if I don't go to school, so how do we improve the attendance of students of color? How do we get them to school? We need to focus on that. And once we get the student to school, then how do we engage them? How do we make learning fun and interesting for that student? Now, partly that might be trying to increase the diversity of our staff. You know, there's a lot of research out there that students learn better and they learn at a higher rate if the teacher looks like them. But I will say at the vocational school, we don't have a lot of diversity, honestly, amongst the staff. So I think really at Smith, our success is less about our instructors looking like the students, and it's more on how we're teaching and what are we teaching. Our students feel engaged and they see the connection to the real world. But if I was overseeing K-8, I would say, what can I do to increase the diversity of my staff? Hopefully my staff would have a better understanding of the culture and the stories of my students to engage them so they want to come to school and they want to learn from me. If you like your teacher, if you respect your teacher, you're going to want to learn from them. If you don't like your teacher and if you don't respect your teacher, you're not going to learn.
Let me just, real quick, Marshall, let me let Rachel's had her hand up for a second, then we'll swing back around.
Yeah, this is actually a follow-up on what Marcia was just asking. I was wondering about the middle school, and you know, my kids went to JFK. I realize we're not just talking about Northampton residents, but it's a crazy time for kids, age-wise, and easy to get lost in the system in middle school, and then you can be lost. You can just be lost, and I'm sure this has an effect. I think it does have an effect what the teachers and the guidance counselors look like in terms of race, age, etc. I think it does have an effect. And I'm just wondering if it's possible to work more closely with the guidance counselors at JFK to pave the way so they're more likely to get accepted. Once they're accepted, I'm sure that they do well in your school, but it's a matter of getting them in there.
Correct.
Thank you. Other comments? Oh, the way your hand was, literally, I could not tell it was up. Okay, sorry, Jasmine. Yes.
So you said yourself a little while ago that the low scoring of the students of color is a statewide issue.
Yes.
And you're also saying that it's not at your school that it really is a problem with learning and acceptance, but it's before then. And I'm wondering about if you're acknowledging that and you're running everything based on numbers, a blind scoring based on numbers, if there's a way for there to be some kind of other way to get to know students prior to that. I taught middle school, and I know exactly what you're saying, how hard it is to get those students on your side. And it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work to get them to trust you, to get them to know that you're not wasting their time. Right. And I think that that's a brilliant part of the current generation, Gen Z, and watching them grow. You know, they're not willing to take people's shit. Right. Can I say that here? Okay.
Problem standing there rolling around here.
All right. So we're raising a stronger generation, and I look forward to that. But what are ways that we, as, you know, the adults here who have the power, what are ways that we can see those people for who they are and how they're trying in their own ways?
A couple things on the top of my mind. One would be to see those students. You know, how do I better see a student? I've never worked in a middle school or an elementary school. I'm familiar with them. One recommendation, and why the middle schools often have a team model concept. In elementary schools, you're typically assigned to one teacher. The concept, the idea behind that is that you have a stronger relationship with one adult. You know, and the research shows that if a student has that strong, positive relationship, they're going to be more apt to be successful. How do we take it that one step further? Okay, so at the middle school, you're on a team, so you still have an English teacher, a math teacher, social studies, so on and so forth, and you sort of travel within that small team. How can you take it to the next level and have that one adult who's able to make that one connection with that one student? At the high school level, outside the vocational world, because again, the vocational school is already set up where half my learning is within the shop. So half my high school experience is with that shop teacher. So you can imagine that positive, strong relationship that is built within the shops. Outside of vocational schools, one of our mandates through accreditation is a mentoring program. So the concept is every student has a positive relationship with an adult outside of a school counselor. That's sort of the goal. So I would take that, how can that be transferred down to the middle school and the elementary school? Are there ways to create some type of mentoring program at the younger grades so that student has that one connection? I would look at that. The second thing would be back to the career piece. Again, half the reason why I think we're so successful within the vocational world is that the relevancy, you know, the students know that what I'm learning, I can apply it to a potential job. What can we do for career education at the younger grades? So if I'm not even talking middle school, I'm talking elementary school. As a former school counselor, I tell the students, and these would be high school students, can you name as many different jobs as you can name? And they'd have several. And it's typically jobs that their family and friends would have or whatever. And this is 20 years ago. I said, well, do you realize that there's over 17,000 different types of jobs? There's so much out there that our students have no concept of what the opportunities are. We all sort of live our little silos. So how can we engage young students about opportunities and jobs and careers and make it fun for them to say, wow, that's why I'm going to school, so I can get this job, so I can be essential. And I feel in Northampton, I'll go as far to say there might be a class issue more than a race issue probably within the city, to be honest. You know, why is there such a large percentage of students of color applying to go to Smith versus Northampton High? When there's the stereotypes that exist within this city, why is that happening? That's a question I want that answer. I feel subconsciously within the system, students who feel like college is an option, they're outwardly or inwardly, they're encouraged to go to Northampton High. And if I'm a student who doesn't think college is an option, I'm encouraged to go to Smith Voc. And I think that's what the data is showing us. But what the data is showing at the end is that those students who went to Smith, they're better off. They're going to school at a higher rate, they're graduating just fine, they're getting a great job, they're supporting a family. So I'll get off my soapbox for it.
Yeah.
But.
And that actually raises, before I pass the mic to Imacon, you know, communication and ways in which city and other officials can, you know, filter down from superintendent's office Northampton to you to communicate better to students, not the stereotype, but the reality, particularly students of color. So more, ideas and opportunities for our study we're doing. So, Imacon, and then I should say that, superintendent, we told him 30 minutes, so we could keep going for a while longer. But let's take a few more questions.
My question, I hope, is very short.
Garrick.
But it's just in terms of, you were mentioning mentoring, and I was wondering if in addition to that, do you think there's, for the junior high level, is there any merit in having a tutor as well as a mentor?
I think as many supports as we can find at all levels, the better off we're going to be. So whether it's that mentor, whether that's an academic tutor, whether that is some type of counseling, what I would highly recommend, if there's any way we can make those connections between a student and an adult on any level, the better off we're going to be. And I think the research would definitely support that.
Great. Thank you. Garrick.
Yes. Again, Andy, thank you for coming in. I already told you this, but for people who don't know, my daughter is a person of color who is attending Smith Oak as a freshman. And just in terms of family feedback, a lot of what you said is what we have experienced. My daughter loved coming to Smith Oak. She actually was on the wait list, so I will also attest to the fact that it is very difficult to get in on your first try. But the things that she really loved was touring the shops, getting a chance to experience everything. So I don't know if every commissioner knows, but during your first few weeks, you get a chance to look at all of the shops. My daughter went there with a clear first choice, but throughout that experience, it was very difficult for her to choose. Electrical became one of her favorites, and I think a lot of it has to do with the teachers. One thing that I didn't know is a lot of the teachers are doing more than one thing. They're teaching a shop, but they're also teaching a class as well, or doing things. So I just want to say that it has been an eye-opening experience for me. The one thing I wanted to ask was about that first chart or graph that you showed, where it showed that in 2016, the non-resident graph. And I'm wondering, were there non-residents before, or was there that data not collected? Because a lot of what we found in this commission is that lack of data sometimes kind of skews how we move forward. So
yeah, it's lack of data. So ever since I've been here, we've had non-resident students at a high rate. We weren't tracking it. So.
Okay. Great. Marcia, you have a question? We're going to take two more, maybe?
I just wanted to hit two things. What you're talking about, I'm trying to figure out which one I should do first. Let me just ask you a quick question. I was asking when we met if you had any information on gradation between black boys and black girls, African American boys and African American girls, kids. Boys of color, girls of color.
I'm sorry, you have one term, I didn't pick up on the term. What was the difference between them?
Yeah, is there a difference in the level of achievement in terms, and also an achievement gap? I worked on a study once that showed that there was an achievement gap between black girls and black boys. And I wonder if that shows up in a school where it's focused around work.
Quantitatively, I don't have that data. Qualitatively, I would say that there would be a gap between black boys and black girls. I think there's a gap, gender gap, across the board. It's less within a vocational school because I think boys are probably even more hands-on learning. That's how they're more hands-on as a learner. And girls, I think at that age, are more of a visual auditory learner. But even with that said, I think our black boys would struggle at a higher rate. I think that would be a fair conclusion, especially more on the academic side, where an academic class is an academic class. They're expected to sit in a seat and have those discussions and learn that academic material. I think that gap closes within the shops, but there's definitely a gap on the academic side. I would feel safe to conclude that.
Okay, and then the other thing is you were talking about culturally and also around race, the idea of how information is looked at, you know, that there's the blind way of looking at the information before students are identified, just getting their application, not knowing who they are. And I would say, where do you stand today, given today's reality of what's going on in this country? Do you feel like, you know, you're making a recommendation around things that fly in the face of what's happening in our country writ large? Do you understand what I'm saying?
I think so. And definitely correct me if I'm wrong. As far as the admissions policies, and those are a very hot topic within the Commonwealth, and you can Google vocational admissions policies, and you can see a lot of newspaper articles, a lot of news stories on it. It is very, very much of a hot topic right now. Where do I stand on it? I want less bias. I want that the graph I shared with all of you. I love the fact that more students of color want to come to Smith at a higher rate than the white students. That makes me extremely happy. And I think that makes us as a school a stronger school. I am very disappointed that a lower percentage of students of color are getting in than the white counterparts. That concerns me. That, you know, I want to know why. So how do we fix that? Well, the opponents of the selective criteria, their answer is a blind lottery. That's the answer that you're going to hear if you go to the Board of Ed, if you read the newspaper articles. They say a blind lottery, there's no bias. It's total luck. So you apply, you put your name in a hat, and whoever gets drawn gets in. I'm not in favor of that. I'm not in favor of that for two reasons. One, as a vocational school, we have some safety concerns. And we do need to make sure that the students who go to a vocational school have some level of ability to follow directions and safety protocols and so on and so forth. If you drive by the campus, you may see a 15-year-old 30 feet up in a tree with a chainsaw. I need to make sure that that student can follow basic directions. I have a student in the advanced manufacturing program using a $250,000 lathe. I need to make sure that he or she's not cutting their finger off. So I think there should be some criteria. So I would not be in favor of the blind lottery in that aspect. The second aspect is, I don't know if a blind lottery is where this society wants to go long term. I do feel that hard work and achievement means something. And what are we teaching our elementary and middle school students? That I want you to try hard, I want you to come to school, but there's no carrot, there's no incentive if it's simply a blind lottery. Then what are we teaching the students at that level? So I think there should be some carrot, and as a former school counselor, and I hear this from the middle school counselors, that if we move to a lottery, I'm taking like the biggest incentive that our counselors have, we're taking that tool away from them. Because now we can't motivate the students to say, you need to go to school, you need to come to school every day, you need to try really hard if you want to go to the vocational school. So I think a blind lottery would minimize that.
Sorry. No, it's okay. Jasmine, I just did Renika online. I have the computer up here. Actually had her hand up right before you. So let's let Renika go, and then we'll let you go, and we'll close out. Renika, you got the mic, and then Jasmine.
Renika, you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry about that. First, I want to thank you for your time and for this presentation. It was very, very informative. And I think it's actually very timely considering that we are going into the budget season for the city. And your comments about how to increase the Black students at Smith starting before they get to you, and at least with middle school. And so I was wondering if you would be willing to write up your recommendations very quickly for us so that we can use that to submit for during the budget process.
I can definitely draft. Yeah, I'll find a way to draft some recommendations, yes.
Great. And that speaks to a question I was going to ask. Jasmine.
So I taught at PVPA, and we did use a lottery system. That's how I got into PVPA first, because I went there as a student as well. And I don't think I ever could have gotten into PVPA prior to that. You know, I was very lucky to get in the lottery system. And I've seen kids come up with, again, in middle school, seeming behavioral issues who, you know, maybe wouldn't listen. But then again, we come back to it takes a really good teacher to bring them out and to explore that potential. And I think that there is a certain bias that comes with a difficult student and teaching. And so I just wonder, having that, you know, that blind casting of just getting people by numbers, if that is without bias, you know, and I think you were saying that it's not, but you're worried about the lottery system and having those students not be able to listen. But is there a way around that?
Yeah, you raise a great point. I think back to Commissioner Morris, her question as well. You know, so while I'm not in favor of a blind lottery for the reasons I just shared, how do we counter that? So one of the ideas floating around statewide might be a minimum criteria lottery. So is there a way that as long as I meet a certain threshold for attendance, a certain threshold with discipline, I qualify for a lottery, and then make it, you know, random at that point? That's one option. Another concern I have, and my colleagues statewide we have, is around access. So again, the data I shared with you is based on students who knew about us to apply. But how many families and how many students have no idea that we even exist? And that's a real problem. And back to the budget, I don't want to be blunt, but I will be blunt. Money is attached to a student. That's the bottom line. And you know, my colleague, Dr. Bonner in the city, every time a student from Northampton decides to go to Smith, that's less money for NPS. And that's a real problem. And my counterparts, the traditional superintendents across the state, they are held to a higher standard by the school committees to say, why are you losing enrollment? Why are so many students leaving our district to go to the vocational school? So they are doing everything they can to make sure that we don't take the students. And I respect that, I value that. The problem is, many middle schools do not allow the vocational schools to go in and give the information to the families and to the students. Why would they want to? Okay, that's not the case at JFK. You know, could we have a stronger relationship? Of course. You know, everything can get better. But I'm not using JFK as the example. But back to ELL students. You know, if I'm an immigrant family into Northampton, I have no concept about vocational education at all. How would I even know to have my child apply to go to Smith? And I think that's a disservice for that particular family. And I feel there's a lot of families, if you're not familiar with vocational ed, or you're my generation and older, vocational ed, there's a stigma to vocational ed. You know, when I was in high school, that's where, you know, those kids went. That's no longer the case. You know, we are often now the school of choice for many communities. You know, we are a safer school. We have less bullying. We have less drugs. We have less violence. Our students attend at a higher rate. They graduate. They go off and become successful candidates. But if the families are unaware, they're not going to apply. So back to, is the applicant pool biased? I would agree with you that the students who have applied to come to us, it's already biased because it's already students who, they're the students who knew about us and maybe had the wherewithal to apply. And how many students didn't have the knowledge or the wherewithal to apply? And we're missing out on them. So how can we target them more? So I would argue that one of the solutions is we need more access to the middle school, we need more access to the elementary school. Again, not to necessarily recruit, back to my point earlier about career education and career exposure. The more the students know what their options are when they become adults, I think the more engaged they can become when they're learning in the earlier grades.
Yeah, and just to go back to...
One quick thing about the blind lottery.
Yeah.
Also, how does the blind lottery get controlled for the fact that in Northampton, because it's a mostly white district, the number of students outweighs percentage-wise the number of students of color. How does that get managed in a lottery?
So hypothetically, the data I shared earlier tonight, that we saw that a higher percentage of students of color applied than white students. Now, granted, there's still more white students that applied, but the percentage of the two groups, there was a higher percentage of students of color that applied, but then through the application process, a lower percentage of them got accepted. Through a blind lottery, if that pool of students of color was higher, just the random choice, random chance, I would assume that a higher rate of the students of color applicants, they would get in. So most likely at the end of the day, that would result in even a higher percentage of students of color on campus.
I would wonder about that, because if there's 1,000 white students applying and there's, let's say, 200 students of color applying, and you just throw them all into a bucket, the chances that students of color, in percentage-wise, may go down.
And that's
potential to.
Your argument you just made is the same argument. It's a great point that I've made to the state, not looking at students of color, but actually our students with disabilities. So I share with the commissioner, who's in charge of education statewide. I've talked to him to say, you want a lottery, I've got 35% of my students are a student with a disability. You move to a lottery, chances are that percentage is going to go down, and is that what they really want? So I actually agree with you. There's a potential that perhaps the number of students of color may go down. Possible.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. I know we tried to get you to come, earlier since we met with you in October, but I appreciate you coming out, and I also appreciate your candor.
Yeah, I appreciate your time and your efforts.
And just to reinforce other commissioners' point about, recommendations. I mean, obviously, we're interested in hearing, getting your voice, your school to be part of the. So as you think about, the essential questions, one of which is, we just talked about, the gap between, those that apply and accepted. If you would just take your time and I know you don't have that much time, but whatever time to write down what you imagine, that would contribute to our ability to, give a holistic picture to the city council and mayor, to this realm in terms of education and ways we can deal with, sort of realities around achievement and equity and all those things are important. So we'll look forward to getting that written down. And is it okay if we have other questions for you as we move forward? We can maybe send you an email or reach out to you about it. We really appreciate that. You have given us a tremendous amount to think about, you know what I mean? And so I'm sure that some of us really need time to process to even ask even further questions. But with that, thank you. And we're going to move on our agenda. All right, have a great night.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yep, no problem. All right, so that was great. Let's go through our next agenda item is just sort of updating on the survey and the interviews. Commissioner or Rachel and others have pointed out some glitches that I think have been at this point taken care of. Is that true, Sage?
Yeah, and I prepared just one, and I'm happy to cede most of those 15 minutes to community engagement, but I did prepare just one little slide pointing out highlights of the survey so far.
Okay.
Let me grab that. So on Martin Luther King Day, we officially launched our survey. And first I want to say thank you to the city for helping pay for some of our materials. Thank you to the local churches and synagogues who helped promote and get people to respond, many of whom sit on the Interfaith Reparations Roundtable. And special thanks to Commissioner Rachel Naismith, who promoted this through Northampton Neighbors, and as Guzman just mentioned, has been very diligently forwarding a lot of useful feedback from survey respondents, including those glitches, which, yes, I think have been resolved now. Great. So just to run down the slide really quick, we've had 75 quality responses, 74 as of this morning. I think we've had a couple since then. Of those, only one is identifying as Black or African American. of the results, we have a lot of commentary, which I'm not going to talk about today, and I'm in the process of kind of compiling and organizing. But a few standouts. When we asked respondents to rank the recommendations that exist in the preliminary report, overwhelmingly the top two are these here, to basically stating to keep the process going, that the city should encourage, assist, chronicle, and publish information about everything going on, and that major institutions in the city should pledge to meaningfully involve themselves in reparation efforts. And then in addition to those two, we saw overwhelming support for a successor committee, and this dovetails well with the superintendent. I think people really want more educational opportunity too. And that's,
Great.
yeah, those are the notes of what
It's a good little snippet in terms of highlights. Now, as we know, outside of that sort of ball rolling, one of, would you just mind letting in Garrick, or he's locked outside? One of our goals and desires we've talked about is trying to get these in-depth interviews, right? So being able to actually talk to people in the community, particularly African Americans, who, you know, as studies have shown, might be less likely to be involved with doing sort of the surveys. And so one of my questions and interest points for all of us, and this doesn't necessarily have to happen verbally, but is just getting people to commit sort of detailed time when hopefully, you know, we'll be able to really use our personal network, which I want to talk about in a second, to get people to agree to do in-depth interviews. But we also need us to sort of commit to when we could possibly be available to do them. I've talked to some commissioners who have mentioned time slots when they're available, and I just want to encourage, you know, as many commissioners as possible to do two things. The first is attempt to use your personal network to identify potential people for in-depth interviews, right? So in my case, for example, I have a list of people who I know in Northampton who identify as African American, who I've, you know, a couple I've reached out to, but I plan to sort of systematically go through that list. If each commissioner were to, for example, identify 5 people that would agree to do a 15-minute interview and sort of talk about their experiences, you know, that would get our numbers up. You know, it really doesn't require, you know, I mean, if we had 10 people per commissioner, that would be extraordinary. But even 3 to 5 is the ask. And so what I mean by that, the ask is, hey, you know, would you be interested in doing an in-depth interview? And if that's the case, going on to our website and signing up for a slot. Obviously, you could also just email, you know, Sage and say, you know, I'm available at this time. But the key is us sort of committing to, you know, reaching out to people, email, phone, and just asking, hey, listen, you know, then, you know, would you be willing to do that? So that's the ask. That's the hope. Sooner than later. Let's set what's today. Today's Tuesday. By Friday, if we can try to motivate ourselves to send out emails, correspondence, or tap into people, that would be fantastic, right? Because we really want to spread it out, and we want to get as many people to be able to sign up as possible. Yeah, Jasmine.
I do a lot of work in social media, and I know the importance of graphics and accessible graphics for people to just look at visually. I could make something like that for the survey. I could get the links sent to me.
It's a great idea.
And then we could send those out, and people could just save them in their phone and be like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. So we'll work on that.
Cool.
Yeah. Otherwise, you know, hopefully, like I said, people will be willing to either set aside time if you have the time to be a person to interview people. That's great. Second part is to reach out to people and to say, hey, listen, I'm on the commission. We're trying to do in-depth interviews. We really want to hear voices of African Americans. Would you be willing to participate in that? So I'm working on some language with Sage for an email that I could just give people. You know, we sort of like talked about, we need a chance to finish it. So we'll send something around to everybody that will, like, you know, give you a template if you feel like, oh, I need to get the language. We'll send it out to everyone to facilitate that. Any questions or comments about that process? Any suggestions for other processes for reaching out to African Americans in the community for in-depth interviews?
We'll talk about some of that in the community engagement update. I do have a question about the survey. And
Yeah, go ahead.
and I'm also concerned about the number of respondents. There are 30,000 people in this city, and my sense of it is that we may need a to look at what's the best way to roll out the survey in a more blanketed way. So I had two suggestions which I floated up to Sage to communicate with you. One was to identify a training person that would train several people to do this in the churches, and they would have a more hands-on process with people, like an actual survey, clipboard, pencil. Here, can you fill this out? Not all people are going to engage with a link, and also just in terms of a link, you know, if you're not computer savvy or want to engage with a computer, you're probably not going to do this way. So that was one thing that I had suggested, and one way that we might do it is to ask the churches to identify one or two volunteers and then do a short training for them and say, hey, this is what we need you to do. And that way we could really push them, because we've given them some tools. I know in the conversations that I've had with the churches in the round table, concerns about approaching Black people here, talking with Black people about these issues. Yep. So, you know, I think it would be good to help people get some tools for their own comfort about how do you engage Black people around this conversation. That was one thing. The other thing that I suggested was that we, which we'll get into we could just flow into the community updates. We've identified 2 students to work on helping us identify Black people and engage Black students at the high school level. So I'll be working with them. We're meeting with both of them tomorrow. I've met with one already. We met in our subcommittee for the community stakeholder engagement and the communication committee, which we've enlarged into bring on Carolyn Oppenheimer and Dan. What's Dan's last name? I always forget his last name. Sage, do you remember Dan's last name?
Kennedy? It's Kennedy. Is that you're talking about, Dan Kennedy?
Kennedy, right, who's worked with the community around the police commission and who has strategies for how to do this, even had a letter that we could now take and adapt that we can use to reach out to Black people. We've gotten emails for about 20 to 25 African American people, but I feel like those are people we just don't. We're not reaching the larger community of Black people, so we're gonna have to do a concentrated effort to do that, which is why we've identified these 2 students to work with us. We'll be in touch with Jeremy to work with the college student that'll take on the high school. We'll talk with the superintendent from Smithville to engage those students. So that will take care of that. And we've got to swing to the college so that we can get both people who work in the community and the Black students, the Black college students on campus. So,
great.
But you know, this is gonna take time to do this. And so if we reach out to the churches in a more, you know, concerted effort with an actual plan, I think we'll get further than 75 respondents. Amherst was able to do 900.
I think it was 400. I think it was close to 400 or 500. But okay, great, perfect. Do you have a time frame for your engagement with the student with going on campus at Smith?
The students just began. The students will begin tomorrow.
Great.
And so that will take care of the high school. I reached out to the Smith College president. We can now move forward with that. Sage has been instrumental in helping me get a letter to her and finally got some feedback from her. Also,
Great.
Carolyn is reaching out to, I forgot the Professor Pryor, to start talking with an African-American professor that can then help us get into that school and the black faculty. So we'll be working on that.
Okay, great. Emma Khan had his hand up. Yeah, go.
Yeah, I just wondered, I'm kind of new on this commission, and so I was curious, is there a uniform format for interviewing people? Is there a questionnaire that's been developed, or how far along are we?
So the development of that is in the process for the interviews right now, and so we should have that done soon, where we should be ready to roll. So if you have, once people begin to sign up, we will definitely have some questions that we'll standardize and pass around, and they can be used.
I have a draft of that to share.
Yeah, we actually were working on that.
Synthesize some of the. Okay, sounds good.
Great. Okay, other updates in terms of community engagement. We have these events that we have going on, which, again, the goal, just to sort of recap for Jasmine and for Emicon, the goal of doing these community engagement events is to have another sort of above ground opportunity, going back to the critique that we've made since the beginning about the passive nature of surveys. And so we have several planned. We began one last on MLK Day. There was an online one, which I was able to blurb and talk a bit about our work on the 16th of January. We have an event coming up. All this is going to be posted, by the way, and sent around, because I have a sort of finalized, updated calendar. Tuesday the 11th, we're going to do an event at Edwards Church. And oh yeah, by the way, if other people, I should just say, these are ones we have so far. There's a couple that we're still trying to get finalized, but if people have ideas for other community engagement activities, that would be great. We have an event planned on Thursday, February 20th. We have an event planned. I'm actually meeting on Thursday with the chair of the New England, a branch of INCOBRA. And so there's going to be an event on Reparations Day, which is February the 25th, Tuesday. So it's going to be an online event that will bring together. It's more of an event that's going to be, it's literally for the entire New England. People come from all over online. So that's going to be, Northampton will have a presence of that. And then the 27th, I've been able to partner with Forbes Library and their racial justice team to organize an event in Forbes during the day. Back to Marsha's point, trying to engage people in a variety of ways and a variety of times. One of my observations going to Forbes Live during the day is it's actually really very used by many black people at Forbes. And so hopefully by having a luncheon, which they're going to sponsor, we'll be able to attract people to come to that event, which is, again, an opportunity to talk about the work we're doing, and also an opportunity for them to possibly get more people we necessarily are not in our networks to be able to do an in-depth interview, right? So certainly the goal is for that. The two other events, that's like 4 events right now, which is a lot, right? I mean, it's 4 to 5 community engaged events. Will be publicized to the mayor's office, other entities, superintendent. I've been in touch with some of the schools. So, we're hitting, and we should be able to blast out information when people come in the door. There'll be surveys available on the cards. There'll be people there, as Marcia suggested, with clipboards saying, hey, you're at this event, but if you're interested in that interview or you're interested in filling this out here, please do so. So really these community engagement events are just to get things offline, get things in the community, intentionally at the variety of places in the community. So, we really get more people involved and at stake. The last, I know we've been working hard on the high school, and now it seems fantastic that, Commissioner Morris has been able to really make this connection with Folk School. I'm working right now on coordinating people in PTOs at the elementary schools, right? So that's a realm we need to do. So I'm in the process now of having a meeting with representatives of each of the 4 elementary schools PTOs, and then asking them how can we engage the parents of students, particularly students of color. And so I'm hoping over the next 4 weeks we'll be able to have at least, at minimum, one event that's really focused on parents and children in the elementary school. It'd be a dream if 1 or 2 elementary schools said that they would co-sponsor and run something, but at least if we can have one event that's advertised to all the elementary school parents, maybe at Leeds or something like that, or Bridge Street, then people can come who are interested in learning more about our work. And then, of course, always the goal is to hear from them about their experience around racialized harm or suggestions they have for ways in which we can inform the city council and the mayor for ways to repair. So those are the primary big moves that are happening that we're trying to make sure we do outside the other stuff we mentioned. I know that Renika and I had spoke about an event, so that's possibly to come. So we have that's still in the process solidifying. And then Felicia had an art one that we've been working on, that we still are trying to get nailed down in terms of the place and the time and things like that. So those are just more updates around our aggressive community engagement issues right now. Garrick, thoughts?
Yeah.
Hand raised.
So I wasn't here the last meeting, but in terms of getting the survey out,
Yep.
I think I'd forwarded this to Dr. Patterson when she was here, but actually Cynthia is in the audience here, but she and I worked on some community engagement for a survey.
Yep.
We were doing the study for barriers to service.
Yep.
So I can forward that to you, Anthony, and you, Mom, for that. But I just wanted to update people that after the MLK event that you did, which I attended, I went over to Salvo House, which is part of the Housing Authority, and handed out some of the cards that Anthony gave me, which thank you very much. It's really nice to be able to do that. But I would look at maybe going to some of the Housing Authority places, whether it's Salvo House, McDonald's, and really engaging there. I know that at least in Salvo House, they just finished a program where they gave out refurbished laptops. Mm-hmm. So to Marsha's point of people who have difficulty, they are working hard to kind of bridge that gap. And so those are places where it's not so much a community event, but showing up and engaging with those residents, I think would be very helpful to try and target that market.
Yeah, and just to reinforce that, I have been in touch with other people who are making currently a list, which I need to check in on, to be sure. The goal is to be sure that a representative or someone who's a volunteer or a member of the commission goes to every institution and attempts to partner, meaning getting the sort of okay to go inside, okay to potentially interview people, okay to hand out or at least email links to the survey. So that's the goal. That's the ambition. Right. So what we need to do, and this is what I think one of your points is that coordination of that needs to be solidified. So we're ensuring that people are being efficient and we're not just having commissioners running around, and doing it all. So that solidification hasn't happened yet, but it is a goal and it's something to follow up on to these entities that said that, they'd be willing to do that. You know what I mean? Just to be like, okay, here we are. Can you tell us which places you're going to hit so we can make a chart? You know what I mean? And be sure that all the places are hit so we don't miss anyone, right? That's another piece of it that's not informal. So it's a great suggestion. We'll be sure we follow through with that. That's on our agenda for this week to make sure we lock that in. So, Marcia, you had something to add? You're unmuted. Whenever you unmute, I think you have something to add. And then Rachel.
I was going to ask you about the work that's being done at the committees. Are we getting sign-in sheets to see what actually is happening in terms of community engagement and how many people actually show up? When I reviewed the report from Amherst, they had quite a few opportunities for people to be able to speak from the community. So we need to make sure that we know that we actually are getting people to these events. It's not just enough to run an event, we have to make sure people are getting to these events. I'm okay was a setup of something that happens every year that the pastors do. And that event drew 40 or so people. Other events we're gonna have to, where we're producing that event, that's very different than something that's running every year.
exactly. And we will absolutely have a report back to all the commissioners about how many people attend the events. Just to rewind for a second, the strategy is what I'm describing and using basketball analogies, a full court press. So that means that if we do an event, let's say, and we have 5 participants, and, maybe that's a really successful thing because there's 5 black people, that's 5 more black people. But let's just say that it's not successful. That's why we have right now, we have upwards to 10 different, specifically community-engaged events. We have 5 that we're coordinating, and we have other entities in the community that are running events. And so, again, with social media, we'll add that to it. With other informal ways of trying to get people involved. This is a comprehensive, which, by the way, Marcia, I went through Amherst's because I'm very competitive, and we're doing double the quantity of community engagement events that Amherst did, only because we're so passionate about being sure that every single individual in Northampton, especially every black person in Northampton, has an opportunity to potentially go face-to-face with us, right? Or other volunteers to learn about the work of the commission, to share their ideas about their racialized harm and what they've seen, and then give their suggestions. So absolutely 100%, we gotta have sign-up lists because we wanna know other ways to potentially even touch people and say, hey, this other event's happening. So it's a great suggestion. We will be absolutely certain we get those lists. And that actually brings me to an important to-do list for us. We need to know, and this will be sent down in email, please check your email, or you can write it down right now. Ready? We need volunteers, commissioners who will volunteer to go to community-engaged events that are put on by people in the city, right? So if a church or synagogue has a community conversation and has an event, we need commissioners to volunteer to go to them. And so that's a task that, if we can have 2 commissioners at 1 or 2 at each event, I think that would be fantastic. The more we have, the better, but at least we want to be sure we have a coordinated effort so we just have coverage of these different events that happen. That's the first thing, right? And so I'm hoping we can volunteer to 1 or 2 community events being held by representatives of the community or us. The second ask, right, which is outreach to any local organizations and institutions that we've not been able to reach about ways they can engage their constituency about our work. We have a fantastic list. I'm not sure, Marcia, do you know who comprised the list of institutions? Was that you and Rachel and others? There's a whole list that's in a folder of institutions in the city. And it has yes and no. It says ones we reached out to. But that's a great start, is my point. But we need to update it and just be sure that we have one voice and we're reaching out. Yeah, Emicon, about that.
Quick question. Does
Yeah.
the commission itself have its own website that we can list all these events and whatnot?
We do. We haven't yet because we just are getting final confirmations of dates and times, the details. But hopefully on our website, we'll be able to have all this stuff, right, Sage?
Yeah, we can edit. So the commission has a page on the Northampton City website, but to the question of social media, is that the most efficient way to publicize? I don't know. So I would welcome your input on that.
I think it's definitely one important way besides a more passive, the commission website or any website is there just as a sign on a wall, but community engagement where you're hitting people with social media, and updating them constantly. In fact, the whole entire events that happened on MLK Day at First Churches, I think that was only available on social media. Because I looked around and I didn't see it anywhere listed except for on social media. So clearly, even institutions in the city
sent out emails to all of their constituents.
Yeah, and the only problem with that is I Googled it to ensure the time, Marcia, and I couldn't find it online anywhere. Then on social media, it had a nice little flyer. It had all the dates and times. So what's my point? My point is that social media is essential. It's essential. And my second point is that at the same time, when someone Googles events related to reparations in Northampton committee, they should come up to our page, and it should just have a calendar of all of that we can update that has it all, right? So it's not an either or. We're absolutely going to do both. Jazz, you had your hand up. Go.
I agree. I think it's an and thing. I think there's a generational gap in the usage of websites versus social media. I think long-term websites are dying out, and that we're going to be seeing a lot more work on social media that would have otherwise been on websites before. Websites are, of course, really useful things, and people do go to them, and emails are amazing, but just being able to have that one graphic that you look at that you can save, I find very, very helpful to my brain, because just having to go through so many hoops sometimes with the current world, I just don't have the time. So just
and touches, and just like, I mean, being able to, for each of these events and anything that's happening in the city, the minister that's coming to St. John's, being able to reach out on social media and post it is essential. So glad we have someone that's volunteered their time to do that. So we will be absolutely. Last point for me, and then we'll take questions. And that is, I'm looking at my notes here. I said outreach to local organizations. Oh, so last thing, and this is something for us to hopefully reach out to Sage or me about. We know we have these institutions that are some are banks, other organizations with racial covenants. It would be great if the commission and commissioners could volunteer to reach out to these entities, Greenfield Savings Bank, Smith College, and set up a time to speak with them and to get their input or ideas or suggestions about repairing, or what they plan to do sort of now that they're aware of the racial covenants. And so that was my last sort of thing of community engagement is, again, not to be like answer now, like I don't need you to tell us now, but just can you let us know if you're willing to email and potentially meet with some of these financial institutions, because that's something that we really haven't done yet, except for 2 that reached out to us, but I'm not even sure the state of that. But I think it's something that we could put in the final report in terms of how these institutions have responded, now that the commission has come up with this information. So that makes like 4 different, 5 elements of community engagement, which I'm hoping we'll be able to be involved in. You know what I mean? As commissioners. Those are the tasks that I have. Other tasks, we got 2 more minutes of our time, then we're in overtime here. Comments? I know that Jeremy and Felicia are working on something for the high school. I can announce that, mention that. That's still in the work, so we haven't. Yeah. If not, move to this.
If not, I'll move to adjourn.
Move to adjourn. Do you have a second?
I second.
All right. Well, let's go through our roll. This is how we do things around here. I don't know if y'all do it over this. Okay. On the table is move to adjourn. Garrick Perry.
Yes.
Marissa Elkins. Is Marissa still with us?
Yeah.
Yes.
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 The whole time. Yes.
Yes. Marsha Morris.
Yes.
Some Power Green, yes. Renika, yes. Oh, sorry, Renika. I'm answering for you. Sorry. I'm like so hungry right now to get to eat at 4 or 5 o'clock. We got to do dinner after this, so sorry. Renika.
Yes.
Rachel.
Yes.
All right, I think that's everyone, right? Oh, then that's you guys. Oh, Jeremy.
Yes.
And then our new commissioners, Emma Khan.
Yes.
Jasmine.
Yes.
All right, I got to get the piece of paper with y'all's names written on so I remember. All right, a meeting is adjourned. We look forward to, more community engagement. So have a great evening, everybody.